Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, March 6th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the 2022 United States gubernatorial elections that are up this election year, this upcoming November. Now, before we get into this, I do want to apologize for not uploading for the past 2 days. I flew home Friday morning, and I have just been spending a lot of time with my friends and family, so I really was unable to have an upload and adhere to my traditional schedule. We'll be right back on track, though, going into this week. I'll be returning back to school, and I hopefully will be able to return things out at a normal rate. And then we can continue through that, especially with these midterms shifting so significantly with international events and more domestic events as well, really shaping the way that this midterm election is going to go. So in our video, we are going to be taking a look at 38 races. Now, 36 of them are the real ones we're actually looking at because Virginia went red and New Jersey went blue. But beyond that, what we have here is a significant portion of the states that are going to be seeing governors elected through this midterm cycle. Now, this midterm cycle is not nearly as consequential as 2018 was. And I say that because in 2018, the Democratic Party got a bunch of last-minute victories that was able to halt some of the states that had otherwise more possibilities of being gerrymandered in favor of the Republican Party. For instance, in the state of Wisconsin, because they elected a Democrat there by just under a point in 2018, or 1 or 2 points, that ended up with a Democrat who could veto the new congressional map, and then it went to the courts, and they actually chose the more Democratic favored map. Things like that happened all across the nation because Democrats were able to win in many of these key races. But since 2022 won't be like 2018, not nearly as much in terms of the Democratic Party vote share, but also, like I said, in terms of what it actually means for the future of our nation, but it is still pretty important. What we are going to find here is that we might find some long-standing Democrats defeated because of this expected to be Republican year, or potentially, again, some of these long-standing Democrats actually hold on despite the year potentially going in favor of the GOP. Right now, the Republican Party has about a 2-point lead nationally speaking when it comes down to the generic ballot. So that is something that we should also keep in mind as well, because that will be impacting our governor elections. So characterizing many of these states, I do want to preface this by saying that many of them are exactly how you would expect them to go. I think that a year ago, you could have told me California was going to be safe blue in this election, and 10 years ago, you could have told me the exact same thing. Same thing goes for the state of New York, where we are characterizing that as well. We are also going to characterize the state of Maryland as a safe Democratic state. The state of Hawaii joins the bunch, and that raises the Democratic Party to 10 safe Democratic seats. But in addition to that, the Democrats now also have the state of Massachusetts. I don't think that this Trump-endorsed Jeff Deal is going to do a super good job at running on a Republican Party platform that was efficient and effective back in 2014 and 2018. What we found was that because Charlie Baker was just so immensely popular, it had to be for a reason, right? And that reason was the fact that he was a liberal Republican. This Republican simply is not. The statewide GOP has completely disavowed Charlie Baker, made it so he can't even win his own primary, and that will likely result in a safe Democratic victory for the Democrats later down the line in this November election. So Massachusetts moves over to the safe Democratic column, but now we're moving into the safe Republican states. And there are a lot more safe Republican states than there are safe Democratic states. The Republicans have the upper hand in many of these states. States such as Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska aren't going to go blue in 2022. But in 2018, actually, surprisingly enough, the state of South Dakota almost went blue, only was won by Republicans. Kristi Noem, the famed Republican governor, only won there by about 4 percentage points. Surprisingly enough, she has a pretty weird track record when it comes down to winning statewide races in South Dakota, despite it being an overwhelmingly Republican state. But this time around, we really don't expect it to be super competitive. That could change closer and closer to the election. But again, while we can expect many states to be safe, some states might catch us by surprise. For instance, the state of Kansas actually has a Democratic governor. It's a state that voted for Donald Trump by nearly 15 points in the 2020 election. So weird things happen in midterm election years, which is why we aren't characterizing every single one of the states that you traditionally would see as safe red or safe blue because of the environment, because of who is running, and because of incumbency status. I think that's also a very important factor when it comes down to these races. And I also do want to say that going into many of these toss-up races, they also might contradict where I have them solidified on the Senate level. For instance, the Senate projection might look completely different in some of these key swing states than it does in the governor projection. That's because Senate elections and House elections are much more indicative of the president's performance. Governor elections, really, you don't see much pushback. Sometimes you have it, and sometimes you don't. In the same year, 2014, where Obama was blown out in the Senate, blown out in the House, and lost a bunch of governorships because there was a pushback against him, Democrats still won the state of Pennsylvania by about 10 percentage points. So it really just depends on the circumstance, and a lot of these governor elections are much more specific to the actual candidates and the governor than it is specific to the president of the United States, contrary to what you would find in the House and Senate elections. So with that being said, we're going to characterize the likely Democratic states. These are states that are going to be decided between 5 and 15 percentage points, meaning that they are pretty solid in the Democratic Party side, but it isn't going to be safe. Oregon, I would characterize as likely. That hasn't changed from my most recent projection. If you're surprised to see it, just keep in mind that Oregon never really is a safe state when it comes down to governor elections. In fact, historically speaking, they have had many, many close races. So I think in this upcoming November election that it won't necessarily be close, but Democrats aren't going to solidify their victories here like they did with Joe Biden when he won by 16 to 17 points, which was arguably just a few points over being a likely state. Moving beyond that, I also will characterize the state of New Mexico as a likely Democratic state. I actually forgot one solid Democratic seat, and that is the state of Colorado. Now, I rarely ever see Colorado as a safe Democratic race. I think the last time I had it as safe Dem was, let's see if it's even on this map, back in August of 2021, doing a reevaluation of Jared Polis's approval rating. He is soaring high. He is doing very well for a Democrat in the state in comparison to Michael Bennet and also Joe Biden. I think he has a fairly good shot at winning by a pretty solid margin. He is one of the more popular governors in the United States. He's one of the most popular Democratic governors in the United States, and I think that will be able to hand him, potentially speaking, as of right now, a safe Democratic victory. But neighboring North New Mexico is going to remain in the likely Democratic column, and I don't think much has changed since our last projection. The state of Illinois will also be a likely Democratic seat. I don't think that's necessarily something that we would expect, but keep in mind that, again, just narrowing it down below 15 points is what gets into the likely column, and I think you're talking about a 12, it's a 13-point victory there for the Democratic Party. Moving beyond the state of Illinois, do we have any other likely Democratic states? I actually am moving Minnesota into the likely Democratic column. Previously, I did have it as likely Dem, I think, in the past, maybe in one of my very early on projections. Looking at Tim Walz right now, he seems to be doing fairly well. Polls against many other contenders seem to show him ahead. At one point, I did think that, it was going to narrow down inevitably, and I think that is true to an extent. But I think when you see him come out with 7, 8, 9-point leads, you do have to take that into consideration. When you see his approval rating, when you see what he has done in terms of the statewide initiatives and what he really has in terms of the voter perception of him, what they think he is and what they really like about him, that keeps him, I think, into the point where he's in the likely Democratic column. And I would be pretty confident in that right now. So moving over, we are now at a tie, 16 to 16. The likely Democratic states really doesn't expand further than this. I mean, you are just talking about two northeastern states, Connecticut and Rhode Island, which are typically toss-ups. Sometimes Connecticut is down to just single digits. Sometimes it's double digits, but barely, right? So looking at the state of Connecticut, I am comfortable keeping it in the likely Democratic column, especially considering our national environment. And for the state of Rhode Island, I would also say that this is another state where you sometimes see competitive races. Surprisingly enough, the New England area, despite being overwhelmingly liberal, has been very willing to elect Republicans in the past. I mean, right now there's a Republican in Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire. And at one point in time, there was one also in Maine and almost one in Connecticut and Rhode Island. So it really just depends on the national environment. But these states are by no means solid Democratic states through and through when it comes down to governor elections. And I think right now, a likely Democratic characterization is fair. Moving beyond these states, we also have likely Republican states. These are states, again, within that 5 to 15% column where we pretty much know how they're going to go, but they're not going to be extremely solid. Alaska, I think, was one of those. Right now, we have the former independent governor running. I'm interested to see how that goes with ranked choice voting. I don't know if we're going to see the independent make it through or the Democrat. It really just depends on who actually makes it there, but there won't be any type of split or spoiler vote, which is a good thing for the Democratic Party, a good thing for the independent there. But right now, the Republican Party, I still think, very much has the upper hand, especially given that it is a state that Donald Trump won by 10 points in the 2020 election. Iowa and Ohio, I also think, are fair to be likely Republican states, though the Democratic Party, does have a good candidate, I believe, in Ohio, not necessarily in Iowa. I don't think either of these two races are going to be super competitive. Looking at 2018, even in a dumb wave year where Democrats were winning the House popular vote in Iowa, doing very well in Ohio when it came down to statewide popular vote, not necessarily the House composition. They won the Senate election there. Republicans still were able to win. And I think that is very much indicative of just how Republican these states are. And even with Donald Trump being off the ballot, I still think they're going to remain as likely Republican states for this upcoming November election. So moving beyond Alaska, Iowa, and Ohio, we have some other likely Republican states. South Carolina, I think, will just be narrower than 15 points, but again, very, very solid with its characterization. Texas, I also think, is a state that we can be pretty solid about how it's going to go. In 2020, it voted for Donald Trump by just a margin of 5.6%. So that's not necessarily an impressive margin for a Republican in Texas, considering 8 years prior, it went by 16 points for Mitt Romney. But I will say that it is a margin that, is one that can be used, and you can still see a significant portion of the vote fall off and still be able to win the state. But right now, I would say that Greg Abbott is going to do better than Donald Trump, especially, again, reminding you of the national environment and potentially some pushback from Hispanic voters against the Democratic Party. So Texas goes likely red, and so does the state of Florida. Now, Florida is almost always a swing state. In 2018, it was decided by less than a point. In 2014, it was decided by less than 2 points. In 2010, it was decided by less than 2 points. What you are finding is that routinely Florida is just competitive. But that doesn't seem to be the case for 2022. Governor Ron DeSantis is immensely popular. He is doing very well across the state and is decimating his Democratic opponents when it comes down to the polls. He's up 9, 10, 11 points, and that's enough for me to say and step back and say, while Florida almost always is competitive, I think this time might be the exception, and Florida is going to go likely red. So that goes to 22 seats, 22 governorships for the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party at just 18. So Democrats definitely need to pick up the pace. They definitely need to put themselves in a better position when it comes down to the remainder of these states. And I think that at that point, it does come down to a question of whether or not they have the right candidates or whether the GOP also has the right candidates. I realized I made a very big mistake. I made a huge mistake because I very rarely see these states go red. And it is the states of Vermont and New Hampshire that I should have characterized as solid red states from the very beginning. I can guarantee you there probably is a comment down there that, 5 minutes ago when I made that characterization, they said, why didn't you keep it as safe red? Why didn't you keep it as likely red? Probably, looking at this and panicking that I'm not even characterizing it and thinking that I'm going to be so far off because that would be such a wrong prediction to keep these two states as lean Republican states or even tilt. These states are safe red states. Chris Sununu is popular and he is going to win. Phil Scott is popular and he is also going to win. In the 2020 presidential election, on that same exact ballot, the Democrats lost the Vermont governorship by the largest margin for any Republican in Vermont history. They're talking about a 40-point victory. Sorry, the largest margin of any person on the ballot in the governorships in the entire country. Even Democrats in some states, where they were losing Missouri, right? They were losing in some of these states. They were still able to see Vermont have a larger margin in terms of the Republican victory against the incumbent lieutenant governor. Think about that. And the state of New Hampshire is also going to be pretty solid. No real surprise there at all. That race is very much, solidified for the Republican Party. So now we're down to our true 8 toss-up states, and we can go ahead and start characterizing those right now. The state of Maine is not going to change from its lean blue characterization. I think that is a fair estimation at this point in time. I think Janet Mills will still defeat Paul LePage when it comes down to it. I think Paul LePage has really too closely associated himself with President Trump and really labeled himself and painted himself out to be somewhat of an extremist, and that's not going to bode well for voters in the state of Maine. He may be able to get close because he has been able to win in the past, but I'm not all too impressed by his ability to win in the state of Maine. The state of Michigan is a lean blue state. I think that Gretchen Whitmer, again, looking at all of her data, looking at her approval rating right now, is in a pretty solid position. I would not be shocked if she was able to win the state of Michigan by a lean Democratic characterization, and I think that is a fair estimation at this point in time, and that isn't going to change again from my most recent projection. Another state that isn't going to change, neither of the two, Nevada and Arizona. Now, Arizona in specific has Kari Lake. Now, I implore you to do some research about her because you will find that she is a very large extremist. She's running against Katie Hobbs, the Secretary of State from the state of Arizona, and Kari Lake has actively called on the arresting of Katie Hobbs. Kari Lake is President Trump, but much more extreme. She has taken things to very, very, very long lengths, and that's something that you just shouldn't do, especially as a governor candidate running in a swing state. The state of Arizona is a state that goes left and right, and in 2018 it went left, and in 2020 it also went left. I don't think this is the right type of race for Kari Lake to be running in, at least the right type of state in specific. And I think even though many other states are going to be going red, many other states are going to be having Republican surges, I don't think that a Republican will win in Arizona at this point in time. At least Kari Lake, who is the Trump-endorsed frontrunner. If it's a normal, traditional Republican, if it was Doug Ducey, you would see the state as lean, potentially likely red. But because you have such a lackluster and such an unappealing GOP frontrunner, maybe the Republican Party already shot themselves in the foot with this one, but I think that right now a lean D characterization is fair. For the state of Nevada, I think Steve Sisolak has been able to do well. I am quite frankly surprised by his ability to hold on to the approval rating and hold on to his leads when it comes down to opinion polling data. But again, you can be taken by surprise in American politics many different ways, and I would say that's probably one of the least significant ways that I've been taken by surprise over this past election year. So the state of Nevada, state of Arizona, lean D characterization, state of Michigan, and the state of Maine. Do we have any more? Let's think about this for a minute. Are there any more? I do not believe that we have any more lean Democratic seats. But we still have some Democratic seats left down the line. So looking at the remainder of the map, what do we have? We have Kansas, we have Georgia, we have Pennsylvania, we have Wisconsin. We have tilt and lean Republican characterizations that need to go through. So for right now, the state of Wisconsin, I'm going to leave in the lean Republican column. Though Tony Evers is able to do well, he's not really super impressive when it comes down to the approval rating. And also the state itself did vote for him very barely by a very narrow margin back in 2018 on the same ballot that they voted for Tammy Baldwin by about 10 points. So you saw a reduction of about 8 points between those who voted for the Senate candidate and those who voted for the governor candidate. What you are finding here is that the Republican Party, while it doesn't necessarily have Scott Walker again, they do have someone who is able to win. I think that any traditional type of someone who is able to capture in that endorsement from President Trump and also capture in the essence of voters in the state of Wisconsin, and who also isn't an extremist. You don't really find that many extremists in the state of Wisconsin when it comes down to who's leading. I think at the end of the day, because of our national environment, Wisconsin goes red. I think that the reason why you see Arizona and Nevada and potentially another state that I'm going to characterize in just a moment, not lean red states, is not necessarily because the environment isn't there for the Republican Party. It's because they have chosen the wrong people. They haven't necessarily chosen the wrong person in Wisconsin just yet. And they might not at all, which means that it will be in a much better position for the GOP. So that leaves us with 3 states that we need to characterize, and we are probably going to take advantage. In fact, we are going to take advantage of the tilt characterization for either political party. Now, the state of Georgia is a state that I would characterize as tilt red. That means it's a state that I expect to be decided by less than 1 percentage point. And looking at the chance of victory here for the Democratic Party, it is high, but it's not high enough. The Republican Party, dependent on who wins this GOP primary, has still a good shot. I mean, it is a state that only voted for Biden by about 0.2, 0.3 percentage points. So it's not a state that is super solidly blue, which also means it's not super solidly red. I think it'll be competitive no matter what. Stacey Abrams has definitely made a name for herself, but I don't know if this year is the right year. But the GOP is fractured. They have a primary where they are scrambling to choose the right person. Is it David Perdue or is it Brian Kemp? This gives Stacey Abrams months in advance to start campaigning against the Republicans, whereas the Republicans are still infighting right now, trying to figure out who is more pro-Trump, who has done more for the Republican Party in the state of Georgia, and we will see what happens in that election, in that primary that's set to occur in the state of Georgia. The state of Kansas is another state that I will characterize by a tilt Republican characterization. Previously, I was much more confident the GOP was going to win in Kansas. At one point, it had it as a likely Republican state, but I don't think that's a fair estimation right now. Looking at the state of Kansas and its entirety, Laura Kelly is surprisingly very popular, and I've seen a bunch of headlines come out of the state of Kansas that show that she has done a very good job as governor of the state. While there were some disagreements over COVID policy, she seems to be much more relaxed, and I don't think that will be in the minds of voters when it comes down to the November ballot. I think Laura Kelly, at the end of the day, will perform very well, but I do not think she will win, just considering how polarized and how partisan we have become as a nation. But it is entirely possible, thus the tilt red characterization. And the final state I'm going to characterize is the state of Pennsylvania, which I'm going to flip blue. And I know you might be surprised to see this, but looking at the 2 frontrunners in the state of Pennsylvania, who do you have? Well, for one, you have someone who attended the January 6th insurrection. That's not going to be a good look for a state that had so much attacked when it comes down to the legitimacy of their election, their electoral votes, and as to, who was actually the free and fair winner of the state of Pennsylvania. It's not good to have someone who actively went against the will of the people in the 2020 election. In addition, the next frontrunner, in fact, the person at the top, not the next frontrunner, but the actual frontrunner, is Lou Barletta. Now, if you recognize his name, it's because you should. In 2018, he lost by a substantial amount in the Senate election. Looking at the past elections, let's go ahead and see if we can hit 2018. You're looking that Pennsylvania went to Bob Casey by 12.9. I get it, it was 2018, but at the same time, I do want to caution this by saying, a 12.9% victory still shouldn't be happening from a state that is supposedly as swingable as the state of Pennsylvania. This was a solid victory. This was a monumental victory, and it was one that was an embarrassment for Lou Barletta. And seeing him now run for the governor's office, I'm not super impressed by his ability to be electable. I think right now the GOP candidates here are lackluster. They need to coalesce around someone, and I think it is entirely winnable, just considering our national environment. Had this been a blue wave year, absolutely not. But because we are in a red wave year, or potentially being a red wave year, the Republicans have a good shot at Pennsylvania. But I think the Democrats, as of right now, circling behind Josh Shapiro through and through with no real primary contender. You are looking at, or no significant primary contender. He does have 2 people running against him, I believe. I think at this point in time, it is a fair estimation to say that Pennsylvania will go to the Democrats. Narrowly, but still go to the Democratic Party. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.